Hey everyone, Internet most depressing book reader here. Today I want to talk about Night of Power, The Betrayal of the Middle East by Robert Fisk. Robert Fisk is a journalist who has been covering events in the Middle East for decades. He's covered the Lebanese Civil War and Israel invasion in the 70s. He's covered the Sabra and Shatila massacre of Palestinians by Israel-backed Christian militiamen in 1982. And at the same year, he covered the Hama massacre in Syria by Hafez al-Assad. He even contributed in uncovering that Israel's excuse for the constant missile launch to Jerusalem in the 90s as a bunch of lies to cover their war crimes. He's also a historian who has published his documentation on the Armenian genocide by Ottoman Turks during the First World War, among other works. He had a lot of critics that have been proven wrong. For example, when the author reported American invasion to Iraq in 2003, one critic called him a dupe of Saddam Hussein regime. And now we know that America's Iraq invasion had nothing to do with Saddam Hussein and has lasted a lasting damage to the country. He is such a powerhouse of war correspondent in journalism that the term fisking, which is line by line rebuttal of other articles that he sometimes do, was coined in his name. Another thing of note is that the author has died during the pandemic in 2020, and all the information above mostly come from research on my own and the foreword in the book by his friend Patrick Cockburn. Great last name, no note. So this book is a posthumous work by the author, and I never read a journalistic posthumous work. It's not like they're musicians with life money unfinished trash that their industry can pick up. So I'm curious on what that would look like. Just a heads up, 1. The book focuses a lot of war crimes, so every atrocities you can think of, think worse. So trigger warning for those. Then lastly, it's a very dense book. I spent 2 days reading the book on weekends for a total of more than 10 hours, and I haven't even reached page 80 out of 600 pages. Granted that I also wrote the script and researched every topic brought in the book, but my point is that it is a heavy book in both figurative and literal sense. But with that said, the late author first broke out to Cairo near the Mugama building, Freedom Square. He has stayed in the Middle East reporting from the front line in many places. But when he first got there 30 years ago, he fell sick with dysentery, puked near the bus station, and swore that he'll leave the Middle East for a new job in the Times of London so he can get out of the Middle East. But it's been 35 years now, and he has since reported many tragedies and atrocities that he knew now that someone need to tell those stories, since in other mainstream news outlets there's no stories that he's talking about. Stories about Middle East dictators and their Western backing, and stories about Israel and America's lobbies. A lot of these are heavily censored in most Western outlets. Even stories on Obama, who in his election speech reached out to the Muslim world, then changed his tone when he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize a few years later, then sending 30,000 troops to Afghanistan, delaying the withdrawal from Iraq, stories about fires in Iran, Palestine, Lebanon, Egypt, and in Arabian Peninsula. They are caused by Western chemical and ammunition that is still burning without any acknowledgement from its sources, and an emerging pattern on normalizing war and having civilian casualties. The Geneva Convention has specifically forbid the kind of attacks which the American, British, and Israel launched, but they still did it anyways. War crimes beat them, which is awful in many ways since war leaves a legacy of tragedy that is still unfolding years and decades after the war is over. Take the war in Fallujah for example. Because of the war, it is normal for babies there to be born with severe body deformities. 2 heads, no heads, 1 eye, 1 legs, no legs, deformed mouth, babies that died before they even live. There are photos of these babies you can access on the internet, but I'm warning you that these are horrifying images to look at. It's hard to find the cause, and there is a high chance that it's from uranium weaponry that America brought into the city, but the Ministry of Health in Baghdad didn't do anything to help, nor the Iraqi government, the American, the British, or any major NGO organization. And these are only the cases whose deformities we can visibly see from the outside. There are even more cases where the babies has heart defect or leukemia that killed them despite looking healthy on the outside. The author also goes out on the street to document what is happening in Baghdad. The war that has been started by George Bush-era America during its search for the fictional weapon of mass destruction is still ongoing. Anarchy and fascism is a few of the gifts that are still left by the US along with their weapon. So much weapons that there were 3 months in 2003 where every day there are new dead bodies every night in Baghdad. A lot of them were innocent civilians, and a lot of them were struck by American soldiers, if not by American bullets. We don't even know most of the causes of the death because Baghdad Ministry of Health already had an agreement with the US that there's no need to autopsy dead bodies. They are brought by US soldiers since they already did it for them, which is obviously false. So a lot of them are documented as either unidentified cause of death or traumatic injuries to insert body parts here, which is just a euphemism for gunshot wounds. The news even stopped reporting this death at some point because how normal it became at one point. A US tank collided with a bus, killing 9 civilians, and there's barely a paragraph of it on Baghdad's news. And since both US and British did not count the bodies killed by their soldiers in official report, a lot of this we only know from war correspondence like the author that goes from place to place and home to home, risking getting attacked by people who are still angry at the white people that killed their family and friends, which did happen at one time during the author investigation in Afghanistan. Then in 2003, during the Fallujah invasion, American soldiers occupied a school and there were protesters wanting to get them out of school for, education, so they can continue their study, and the soldiers fired at them, killing 16 men and wounding 70 more. The soldiers claimed that they were shot first, but no bullet holes was found in the school they were hiding at. This culture of violence breed even more violence because of course the people in Baghdad won't just stay silent as the Americans are actively killing them. So the violence keeps escalating and sowed a seed of grudge and cruelty to how they interact with each other. Such is also the case with the Iraq-Iran War and Saddam Hussein's invasion to Kuwait, which is being supported by America, supplying them with chemical for biological weapons. It was not after Saddam Hussein's atrocity cannot be hidden from public eye that America put back their support and condemned them. So much casualties that could have been avoided if not because of America's alliance with Saddam Hussein. When data scientist Beth Osborne Daponte published the casualties of the war that was estimated to be as low as 158,000 Iraqis, with half of them women and children, she was fired and smear campaign was run against her until America's Civil Liberties Union threatened legal action, and she thankfully managed to get her job back. But that's not the end of the Iraq-Iran War. After Saddam gave up without a fight during his capture, people still fight because his influence can still be felt, and the war goes on fueled by many reasons to hate during the long war. Meanwhile, America still thinking that what Iraqi need was a trial for Saddam Hussein for them, ignoring that what they need is so much more than the death of one miserable old murderer who's about to die of old age anyway. What they need is electricity, security, peace. If anything, this trial is to display the word of America to public instead of helping the Iraqi civilians. The trial turns into such a mess. There was an attempt by American government to censor every media that went there, taking out their audio recording devices, even when the judge and jury allowed them. They also cannot expose some of his most hideous crime like using gas against the Kurds, because then that would point back to America's involvement from 1980s and 1992 with those crimes. So more than a decade of Saddam's war crime and mass killing was not even brought up during the trial, and because of that, a lot of people who got in power along with Saddam is also still in power. So nothing changes from the life of the civilians there. It's basically still under the same regime before and after Saddam's death, with all the same weapon that was provided to them by America. And some of the victims of this war that was done dirty by the American government is the Americans themselves. Celeste Zapala's son died in Iraq while searching for George Bush's fictional weapon of mass destruction, and 1 week later, George Bush made a joke about looking for said weapon under his desk. Weapon that never existed except for those that they've sent to Iraq. It's what happened when politicians fail to see the humanity of the loss of life and make Americans and Iraqis dead into just a set of numbers. A US Navy surgeon named Drew Plummer made some statement that he wished for the troops to be sent home, and he disagreed with what happened there, but he'll still follow the current order, and he was demoted for saying that lukewarm of an opinion. Meanwhile, propaganda pieces to manipulate people through nationalism BS still goes on. At that time, when the author is reporting the atrocities that America committed on other countries, he's called anti-Semitic and pro-terrorist. It was not until a colonel named David Hackworth became a whistleblower for all the war crimes that America did in Iraq and the lies about the weapon of mass destruction, and more soldiers started to come out with their stories, that people started to take the atrocity done by the government more seriously. A lot of these soldiers either die young or live to suffer until they're old, as we can see from how much they needed to fight just so they can fight the right that was promised to them. Meanwhile, the politicians that sent them to their deaths live happily until they're either old and can barely string a sentence or have all their crimes ignored by their fans. There is this worrying normalization of war crimes that we shouldn't have turned a blind eye on, but it kept going and swept under the rug because time goes on. During Israel's occupation of Lebanon in 1976, there are tens of thousands of civilians dead, which goes mostly uninvestigated. In 1978, Lieutenant Daniel Pinto, acting commander of an Israeli infantry company, strangled 4 Lebanese civilians with tied hands and foot, whose body was found in a well later on. He was sentenced for 8 years, then reduced to 2 years without any reason, then released soon. In 1982, Israel killed 7 Palestinian captives in a makeshift prison, and none of the shooters got punished for lack of evidence. And it goes on and on that during the Haditha massacre in 2005, where American soldiers shot 24 Iraqi non-armed civilians that includes women, children, and the elderly, all the shooters who shot in close quarter are mostly unpunished with only one person got discharged. Because why report it as war crimes when you can just not report them and stay innocent? They even started hiring mercenaries from security firms, so if any war crime is conducted by these mercenaries, they can just say, hey, it's not our fault, it's their fault. These mercenaries wear absurd cowboys cosplay, drunk all the time, and refuse to keep their weapon not on macho display. They are warned multiple times, including by the author and the innkeeper, to be more respectful on a day-to-day basis. They refuse, drunkenly. The 4 bodies who ends up burned and hanged in the Fallujah Bridge, which ends up starting the war, was the bodies of these mercenaries from Blackwater. America also replaced so much of the soldiers there with mercenaries, which not only cost so much more for the American, but also made the stereotype of America in Baghdad becoming this cartoonish loudmouth tough guy known as Americans. But that doesn't mean that the actual soldiers are any better. Janina Strack, an independent photographer and documenter that is famous for documenting a lot of the atrocities during the Holocaust, published a book about the atrocities committed during the Iraq War from soldiers celebrating their murder of civilians and non-civilians alike. And these are atrocities done with their friends taking pictures of them, so these are the ones they are not actively trying to hide. And American government is not the only questionable side in Iraq War. The British people, who are not being fed with American war propaganda and knew that the weapon of mass destruction in Iraq is fiction, is even more confused that their government took part in the war, sending troops to Iraq for no good reason at all. Iraq and even Saddam Hussein was fully cooperative with Britain with their investigation into the proclaimed weapon of mass destruction that America used as a reason to attack, and they found that it was fake faster than the rest of the world. And it was through investigation to Tony Blair that we knew British, America, and even Israel made this plan to attack Iraq, which is similar to the Suez Crisis in 1956 when British, France, and Israel invaded Egypt to try to take control of the Suez Canal. It didn't matter what excuse they used as long as it enabled them to attempt at colonizing the space they're attacking. If in 1956 it was to take the canal for trade route, then during the Iraq War it was for the oil. They claimed that it was the WMD, but they all knew it was fake, and now we all knew it was fake. Then to top it off, this government then stole money from a charity that helped the war victims in Iraq. $4 billion was missing, and the people investigating it are assassinated, sometimes even in public eye with eyewitnesses. That's the new Iraq under America's control. And in the new Iraq, the people in power just decided that oil there will be privatized, and thankfully, American and British companies just so happened to be there to help sell the oil. Isn't that nice of them? What a coincidence. And as if it's not bad enough that they took their oil, they banned the farmers there to save seeds, so they will have to buy seeds from US companies there just to plant some food. Many of this injustice is also silenced and censored with quick violence, which of course escalate and become the main reason for a group that will become a problem also for Jordan and Lebanon, the Al-Qaeda group. Formed from Iraqi's uprising, a group that wouldn't exist if not because of the domino that US and UK has pushed to fall. All of this of course skyrocketed the cost of staying in Iraq more than they have been. By 2007, the cost of the war is up to $1.6 trillion, and during Obama leadership is still ongoing with additional S for $3.3 billion during his first 3 years and another $708 billion in 2011, all just for some oil companies to get richer while the life of the Iraqis got much worse. This without even mentioning when they stole and ransacked Iraq Museum during 2003 invasion, which they blame on the Iraqis. Sure, the Iraqis who live there and often go to the museum for fun is also the people who stole the items there. And the items all just happen to go to the West? What a coincidence. The US kept pushing and kept punishing the people in the Middle East in coordination with Israel that they created people who turned themselves into bombs in desperation to be free from their enslavement. Then when a group goes as far as hijack a plane to a building, the US suddenly got a lobotomy about the hundreds of thousands that they've killed that created the 9/11 scenario. They also got a lobotomy about the first responder who they should never forget. And the more war crime goes unpunished, the more extreme the measure of its victim took, and Al-Qaeda started to branch to even more extreme groups, the Abdullah Azam Brigades, ISIS, Even the Taliban grew more extreme, shooting a 15-year-old Malala in broad daylight. Because as time goes on, a lot of the younger generation grew up only knowing the bitterness of oppression. Before camera was more normalized, a lot of the stories very one-sided, making the Pan-Arab War as solely the villain and never the victim. But photographs of the violence and the invasion started to come out, pictures of torture chamber, videos of women and children inside those torture chambers where adults pleasure themselves with horrifying acts of degeneracy. A documentary based on some of these war crimes like Redacted was even made during that time. But war crimes kept going unpunished as time went on. The Haditha massacre in 2005, where 24 civilians was murdered in cold blood, the Isakis massacre, where another 10 civilians was murdered before an airstrike was ordered to try to cover up the evidence. They even captured and tortured a journalist named Sami al-Hajj for decades without any reason. And when they finally released him, they didn't even give him any compensation despite all the crimes they performed on him during his captivity. America will say that they're there because they care. But Jason Westburn, one of the whistleblowers of these cases, reported burning a woman who was about to give them food because they are scared of her. That's how much they see the Iraqis as people. This evidence eventually started to open our understanding about the wrong the Middle East faced with this colonization attempt, especially since all evidence that just cause that they used to attack are actually oil and money and power, and that power gives the soldiers some kind of licensed cruelty that influenced their conduct there. It's the same as what happened during the Moro massacre in 1906, where a lot of war crime was done and there's no punishment that came from it. The book gave us many more names and cases, including Bahamosa, Alto Guantanamo, and other US camps by the CIA, including names and how they were tortured, often to death. The book even have cases from Canada, like the Mahar Arar case, where an innocent Canadian was kidnapped and tortured. These torture also have been proven to not work because people will say anything under them, so it's not even useful to get solid information, which makes them even more vain. These are of course acts of terror which only further escalate the scale of violence in the ongoing conflict with Middle East countries, especially when there's no accountability at all for the injustice done, which only fuel the radicalization of the youth in Middle East, knowing that this is how the world is for them, where they are called terrorists for actions that are not as bad as the ones done by the supposed to be good guy of the world. While reading and researching the book, I also found an article by The Atlantic defending the murders and war crimes done in Iraq, which reminds me of the recent article making light of killing innocent children in Gaza. There is a practice of dehumanizing the Arabians, from the Balfour Declaration grouping the Muslim and Christian Arab to non-Jews, to Winston Churchill comparing them to a dog in manger. Of course, the Palestinians won't just accept being treated as less than human. They went on a protest during the Balfour incident, photographed by prominent Palestinian photographer Khalid Raad, protesting the Balfour Declaration that contradicted the Sykes-Picot Agreement during the First World War, which agreed that the Palestinians will eventually be left behind. During World War I, US, UK, and France sent Jewish refugees there that was promised to be sent back to Asia Minor but never left. Then after World War II, when US and Canada refused Jewish refugees escaping from Nazi, sending them back to Hitler, a lot of the refugees ran to Palestine following the Balfour Declaration, and soon after World War II, they got rid of 750,000 Arabs of Palestine from their home. With the help of the British Empire that is at their peak at that time, Zionism in Israel quickly took root, eliminating all their left-wing competitors to quickly make Israel into an extreme right-wing government. This is why there are some people who believe the Jews stay silent for the Palestinians. Those people of course haven't read anything worthwhile enough to educate themselves, because just like a lot of Americans are victims to their own government, a lot of Jews are victims of the right-wing Zionist extremists. Some of these voices are Shlomo Sen, who goes as far as refusing to be associated with Jews because of what Israel did to Palestine, Dorothy Thompson, one of the first journalists who Hitler sent away from Germany for calling him insecure, who went to Israel hoping to see the promised land, and saw war crime after war crime that she condemned their terrorism and got fired from the New York Post because of it. Miko Pellet, who became an active member of the PSD movement that is still ongoing right now, helping strategize with the boycott. Even someone as famous as Jon Stewart, who got called anti-Semitic for pointing out the crime in Israel. This notion unfortunately took a long time to break down thanks to Nazi propaganda that is trying to paint all Jewish people as a race that needs to be eliminated. These actual anti-Semitic people makes the crime done to Palestine much harder to be voiced. Historically, there were so many moments where Palestinians almost got their land back, or at least some semblance of freedom compared to the current apartheid. There was the UN Security Council resolution after the Six Days Wars back in 1976, where Israel took most of the Palestinian land that was still owned by Palestinians. The UN agreed that Israel should withdraw their border back before the war, but there was basically a grammatical error that created loopholes where Israel can not only not give the land back for many made-up reasons, but also can expand the land further, which is still ongoing to now in West Bank. Then we also have the Oslo Accord, which is a peace agreement that Israel had with the Palestinian Liberation Organization that Israel never had any plan on fulfilling while under the leadership of the right-wing extremists. They kept expanding their territory and even gave discount on the land for people to move there. He then put wall, automatic turrets, and many borders to make life more miserable for the Arabs living in the West Bank. They put checkpoints which only open a few times a day with limited windows. Meanwhile, many important places like school and hospital are inside, making not only education for children to be difficult to get, but also giving birth to be difficult. Many mothers are forced to give birth on the side road of the checkpoints, and many of them died during the process. The war also helped on taking over the West Bank, which later only got worse after Donald Trump helped recognize Jerusalem as Palestinian capital. The people in power in Israel proudly called this road Apartheid Road. When Netanyahu came into power, the Palestinian life got even worse because just like Donald Trump, he had a tendency to just make up things on the spot, trying to make people believe that the Arabs are the one who made Nazi kill Jews. Despite Nazi being white supremacists based on Aryan, eugenics, and great replacement conspiracy, and there is no way that the Nazi will get along with Arabs who are not white if you haven't noticed, or not to mention that there are many Christian Arabs too in Palestine. It was so absurd that Germany had to come out and say, hey, what the fuck? No. And a lot of Israel scientists also came out and said, hey, what the fuck? No. But it didn't stop him from connecting every Palestinian in West Bank with this nonsensical conspiracy, the same way he grouped all 2 million of Palestinians in Gaza with Hamas. A group that just like Al-Qaeda is formed only because of US, is also a group that is formed only because of Israel. Every year, violence to Palestine increased by the hundreds. They're throwing trash from above the Arab settlement that the Palestinians had to build nests to catch the trash, which sometimes involves throwing dangerous objects like glass bottle. Their land is taken further and further. Their home was also stolen along with the land. Their sacred building, culturally important building, was destroyed. Then when they got desperate and fight terror back with terror, Israel act all surprised like they're supposed to just roll over and die. How dare they fight back? Hamas is of course not the good guy in this ongoing war. They've killed not only Israel civilians during their attack that makes life for the West Bank Palestinians more miserable, they have even killed Palestine civilians. They've destroyed one of the possibility of ceasefire by firing a rocket killing multiple Palestinians. They're even a group that is invested with so much Israel spy that their leader kept getting assassinated. But you need to remember, if Israel didn't push for violence in the first place, Hamas will never have existed. And the same case is also true for Hezbollah, a group that came out of Lebanon because of Israel's brutal attack to Beirut in 1982, which by the way is a different war from 2006 Beirut war with Israel, which killed even more civilians. But for decades, the report of this crime was undermined and clumped together with conspiracy theory that, as I've mentioned, only makes life in Middle East more miserable. The people who spoke against the crimes are called self-hating Jews for reporting these war crimes. Even director of Human Rights Watch, Kenneth Roth, is not immune to this attack on their characters along with the author and many others. Since a lot of these cases was due to totalitarian government killing weaker opponents, the book of course also goes to the dictators that is in Egypt, where in Tehran, Yemen, Bahrain, every non-violent protest done by citizens was met with brutal violence for decades. From Mubarak to the US-funded Sisi, and how under Sisi's regime, Egypt became as violent as ISIS, committing even the Raqqa massacre. Then the book closes with Syria and how under Russian guiding hand started killing so much of their fellow Arabs just like how they often do. The book had so much information. Despite how long this video seemed like it's going to be, I've grossly oversimplified a lot of the information in the book. It took me longer than usual to consume it. I even had a slight fever from how much information goes into my brain while reading and researching through the book. Just like the 100 Years of War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi that I read earlier this year, there's something that feels prophetic in the wake of the new Gaza war that started after the death of the author and the normalization of doing war crime. A few months ago in Australia, David McBride, a whistleblower who tells the world about their war crime on Afghan, is put in prison while the people who did the war crime stays free. That's how much government around the world has normalized war crime. But while the book documented a lot of these war crimes that are mostly still ongoing, it's not a book that is meant to make us hopeless. There are many ways that groups and people are formed to become heroes in the story. Huda Sahrawi, who founded the feminist union that helps reform Egypt, May Ziadeh, a Palestinian Lebanon woman who, along with Khalil Gibran, helped inform the world about their condition. These, among many, are some of the reasons why there will always be people who speak truth to power with arts, poem, essay, treatise, journalism. That's why they're usually always the target of many government first. In Gaza alone, Israel has killed many journalists, including Western journalists. The author is one of the rare ones to live despite going to war zone after war zone because he has gained enough fame as a journalist. The internet and mobile phone may have done some damages with brain rot, but thanks to it, a lot of these places now have more people that can not only document this crime, but share them to the world in hope of getting help. Like Motas Azeza and Wizard Bisan and more names that we can count. We even have more mainstream attention to them with shows from Jon Stewart and John Oliver. The author may have passed away during COVID pandemic, and it is only thanks to the help of his wife Neloper Pajira Fisk, who is also a journalist, that the book is here. But that doesn't mean that with the death of the author, there is no more people to tell these stories. There will always be truth teller in the world despite how difficult it can be sometimes to tell them. And both the author and Neloper did an amazing job with this book. It's chock full of first-hand information from people who are the residents of the war. It is giving them the chance to tell their story not through the lens of the politician in suits, but through the lens of civilians living in the city most affected by the war. Survivors that only wanted some peace and quiet and the possibility to grow old and die peacefully on their sleep instead of another bullet and bombs from US, UK, Russia, France, or anywhere else. The book can be hard to go through. It is a heavy topic after all. But remember that the author is someone who wrote it by going through war zones even in his 70s, 2 years before his death. And hopefully that somehow can give you the will to go through the book despite its heavy topic. I give this a 5. What do you think? Let me know if I missed anything, so leave your thoughts in the comment below and subscribe to the channel. That's about it. See ya.